It looked like somebody was bent over and had their head in the window of the deer blind. It either heard me or smelt me, and he pulled his head out of the tent and stood straight up, and that shocked me. They don't make people that big.
The way it moved, almost as if it was gliding across the beach. I've never seen anything move like that in my life. They were screaming at each other in gibberish. It sounded like a language, and they were chuntering away back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards. I know what a bear looks like, and there is no way on this planet that what I saw were bears.
What are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Zia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. This is Denise from Texas, and you're listening to our favorite Wes and Sasquatch Chronicles.
We, along with my cousin, decided to go on a week-long hunting trip, expedition, as it were, up in Idaho. I got back in there and up on the ridge, and I guess I was young. I was the first one over and had secured myself a nice little vantage point behind an outcropping of rocks. Something black come out of the tree line over where I thought my dad was supposed to be coming out. We were all in blaze orange. And I'm thinking, man, that's got to be a bear. Had my rifle scope on it. Almost pulled the trigger, and it stood up on two legs and swung around, and it had long arms. And I'm thinking, that is not a bear.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you tonight. We're going to be talking to Bob Strain. And I've always wanted to interview Bob. He is the husband of Kathy Strain. You guys might remember her from episode 655. And I met Bob years ago at Beachfoot. And Bob's just one of the nicest guys on the planet. I can't imagine anyone saying anything bad about him. And I've always been curious about his encounters and how he got from seeing Sasquatch to being with the North American Wood Ape Conservancy Group, where they're actively trying to collect a specimen. And I'm kind of excited to talk to Bob. I want to hear about Tag 7 too as well, where they tagged a Sasquatch and tracked it for several months. Should be a great show tonight. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Bob to the show. Bob, thanks for coming on.
Oh, sure. My pleasure, Wes. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, the pleasure's mine. And thank you again for being here, Bob. It's great to talk with you. I've always wanted to interview you about your encounters. And I know we met years ago at Beachfoot. And I always thought, God, I'd love to hear this guy's encounters. And now I have a chance. Before we get into the North American Wood Ape Conservancy Group that you're a part of, and the Tag 7 that I'm really curious about, can we kind of start from the beginning? Tell us about the first time you ever ran into a Sasquatch. If you would just kind of start from the beginning, tell us what you were doing and kind of walk us into what happened.
Well, okay, sure. Glad to. It was a long time ago. Graduated high school, and I grew up in Texas, and I graduated in 1975. And my dad lived out in California, and we were both big hunters, and of deer and bear and stuff like that. And we, along with my cousin, decided to go on a week-long hunting trip expedition, as it were, up in Idaho. And so I flew to Reno. My dad picked me up, and we all caravanned up to north of Challis, Idaho, which is right near the Montana border. And it was on the east slope or east side of what was then called the Salmon River Wilderness area. Now they've renamed this River of No Return Wilderness, which is aptly named, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of weird things. And we, like I said, there was a big group of us, and we had hunted here and there, and it was probably about our third day in, and we decided to do some kind of a little modified deer drive where we saw this long canyon. There's a road and a creek and this long canyon perpendicular to it with two opposing open mountainsides facing each other. So we decided to go up and send a couple of guys over one ridge and come up and come over the top, and a couple of guys over the other, and maybe somebody would spook something out and flush something out. And I got back in there and up on that ridge, and I guess I was young. I was the first one over, and had secured myself a nice little vantage point behind an outcropping of rocks, and was looking at the opposing mountainside, which is estimated about 400 yards, but it was unobstructed. It was just open air between me in that area, and it was open like a talus slope. It had trees on top and along one side, and rocky outcroppings and trees here and there. And I saw something black come out of the tree line over where I thought my dad was supposed to be coming out. We were all in blaze orange and vests and hats and stuff, and I saw this coming out, and it looked like a bear. It was on all fours, and so I'm training my rifle scope. I got a pretty good look at it, but it was on all fours, but it would stop and turn around and look behind it, and I'm thinking, oh, is this a mama with cubs? And so I wasn't gonna shoot that, and I kept doing that all the way to the other outcropping of trees, and then no cubs came across. So I'm thinking, okay. And then I didn't see it for a couple of minutes, and it emerged on the other side of the trees and went just straight across that talus slope, which is really difficult to traverse. And it was on all fours, and then it turned, it started going straight up the hill. It was on all fours. It was huge, and it was black. And I'm thinking, man, that's got to be a bear. And had my rifle scope on it, had the crosshairs on it, and I'm thinking, God, it's about 200 yards down to the bottom, and if I shoot it, it's just going to tumble down a couple hundred yards. It's going to be real tough to recover. But there was a flat spot right where it was headed for, and I thought, well, I'll wait till it gets to that flat spot, and then maybe it'll drop there, hopefully, and be a lot easier to retrieve. And I'm getting my range, and I'm just about ready to pull the trigger, and it gets to that flat spot, and almost pulled the trigger, and it stood up on two legs, and it swung around, and it had long arms, and I'm thinking that is not a bear. I didn't know what it was. Like I said, I was from Texas, and I never really followed Bigfoot or anything like that. I had heard of it, of course. But it wasn't anything that was in my mind. And I thought, man, God, that's a guy, that's a human covered in black. He's going to get killed out here. Who is that? And I watched it then just walk straight across the hillside and for the tree line on the other side, which must have been at least 100 yards away. So, and it had that, what people describe now as the same type of walk that Patty had as like a cross-country skier, leaning forward and swinging the arms. It had no backpack, had no rifle. I couldn't see a hat. It was black from head to toe. And I'm thinking, man, God, I mean, it kind of made me mad. I thought it was just some idiot out there, in all black. And I just felt like cranking off a couple of rounds over its head just to wake it up. But that would ruin the day's hunting. So I didn't do that. Sat there another 10 or 15 minutes, and I see something way over to the right. It was tiny. It was orange. And I'm thinking, God, what is that, a butterfly right in front of me? I looked in on it, and it was my dad. And it came out essentially the same place that this thing had come out. And Dad was wearing the orange vest, but Dad was tiny compared to this, like half the size. And I thought, man, my brain just sort of, how it kind of gives you one of those, what? Anyway, I talked to him on the radio. We had radios, and I said, God, Dad, who's over there with you? He goes, son, there's nobody but me. I said, God, there's some huge dude dressed in black right above you. Be on the lookout for him. Dad, he's huge. And he goes, son, I don't see anybody. So that was weird. We went back and, of course, looked on the map, and we didn't see any vehicles around, no other access roads or anything like that. So we couldn't figure it out. Of course, there was 8 or 10 of us hunting, so we went on about our hunt. And the odd thing, a couple of days later, now I'll tell you, I never put all this together until I met my wife. She's the smart one of the group, of the pair of us. And it snowed, and then we hunted close to camp. Then, so the next day we headed out before dawn, and going up this little 2-track road, and it had about a foot of snow on it, and we're going real slow, and just beyond the reach of our headlights looks like a big burned out black stump on the right side of the road. Now the hillside went up on the right, and it went steeply down on the left, but it was on the right side of the road. And as we got closer, headlights still hadn't got to it, but it was kind of reflecting. And as the stump appeared to get shorter and a lot wider. And then what looked like I've described as an oil slick moving across the road really slow. It just, at one point, you could just see the white disappear in front of it. And then at one point, it stretched out over the entire width of the 2-track road. And then you could see the white slowly appear behind it as it went off to the left. Just about the time our headlights hit that, it hit a branch full of snow on the side, and all the snow came down. So we stopped there, and it was freezing cold. We talked one guy who was sitting in the right front shotgun to get out and go over the hillside with a flashlight and see what he could see. And he kind of scurried down there a little bit and came back in a big hurry and go, oh, let's go, get out of here. And he didn't want to talk about it. Now we went up to the top of the mountain and hunted that day, and we got back to the vehicle. My dad and I were the first ones back, and we thought there was these giant bear tracks around. Well, they were giant tracks around that circled our vehicle. And I'm going, Dad, look at the size of these tracks. What made that? And he goes, it must be a bear. I mean, they were huge, and they had 5 toes. And so that afternoon, we drove back down to the spot the thing had crossed the road, and we were asking the guy who got out. I said, man, what did you see down there? And he goes, well, all I can figure out, it was a guy, hunter on horseback. I said, what? And he said, yeah. And he was riding away, and he had the hood pulled up he was wearing a fur coat with the hood pulled up. I go, no, wait a minute. That was not what we saw across the road. And how do you know it was on horseback? He said, well, it had to be on horseback to be that big. And it was hiding behind the tree, and then it turned, and it went away, and it was so big, it was a hunter on horseback wearing a fur coat with the hood pulled up. Okay? We go, okay, pal, whatever you say.
Yeah.
And that was in 75. And I didn't come to the realization really what it was until about 2002. I joined the Bigfoot forums just because I finally learned how to use the internet back then, and started talking to people, and people are going, dude, that was a Bigfoot. I'm going, what? This is like 32 years later, 37 years later, whatever it is. And so it finally answered that question in my life. And I know that that's all it could have been. That's all that it could have been. That was the only sightings that I think that I had. I had other odd experiences, where I've seen my dad and I saw three sets of glowing red eyes just outside our fire circle, and they were really tall. And the next, Dad said there were probably raccoons in a tree. And the next morning, I looked over there, and we'd pulled in late at night in our camper and look over there. There's a meadow, and there's no trees right there where that was. And
And was that while you were hunting, Bob?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
saw? Oh, okay.
Well, this was in California, actually, the red eyes. It was not far from where I live now. And we went up a month before hunting season to build some blinds, and so that the deer could become accustomed to our ground blinds or our tree stands. And we pulled in late at night and went out working all day the next day, came back, had a big fire. We saw those red eyes, first one set, then two sets, and third set was lower to the ground and way off to the right. And you shine a flashlight at it, and they would kind of like get smaller, then they disappear. We didn't go out there and look. We really weren't. I mean, there's wildlife everywhere. It didn't concern us. And we got back in the camper. It was a cab over camper, one of those that slides into the back of a truck. He and I are sitting there, and he's making some sandwiches for dinner, and something smacked the side of that camper so hard it knocked stuff off the shelves. And it hit the rearview mirror on the front of that old truck, and the mirror just went whoa, and just wham! What in the? And we jumped out, and we ran around the truck with our pistols and flashlights. There is nothing. It is dead quiet out there. We see nothing that could have smacked the side of that camper. We know what it was. We thought it was a giant tree or something. Nothing. And just as we're getting into the back of the camper, just over the little drop off right in front of us, come this ungodly scream like a woman being murdered. And it kind of ended up, I'd heard screams like that before, but this was just a loud scream of several seconds. And then back where we saw the red eyes, there was an answering one. We thought, man, and then I had trouble sleeping that night. It sounded like something walking around the camper all night long. I didn't know what it was. Never, Bigfoot wasn't, a part of my vocabulary. So I don't know. Those are a couple of the strange incidents that happened before I even got into what we call Bigfooting.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing them. I mean, it's fascinating accounts. What do you make of that behavior of them slapping, and then you go out there and you look, and then they scream at you from a distance? Do you think, what's your take on that sort of behavior? Because you hear that a lot, Bob. I mean, I have witnesses on the show where they'll come up, hit the side of the house, and
right.
You guys have experienced that down there with the North American Wood Ape Conservancy. I mean, rocks being thrown and... What do you think that is? Do you think it's attention, or do you think it's more of a trying to scare you out of there?
Well, a little bit of both. I think that number one, it's great fun for them, I think, but it's probably some kind. They're not happy. They're wanting to shake you up. And also, if you think about it, they don't have cable and HBO. I mean, something like us shows up out there, we're worth watching. And when we go inside, the fun is over. And so I don't know whether they're eliciting a response. It's an aggressive behavior display, which I didn't really take it so much as that, as it is just sort of a, tag, you're it kind of thing, or, just, hey, come out and play. Because if they want, aggressive dominant displays, I mean, they have ways. I mean, they've pushed over giant trees and they make a lot of racket. This is just something that I think is great fun to do. And as far as the screaming goes, talked to some audiologists about this and people that are into primate vocalizations, and some of the times those vocalizations aren't necessarily they don't do it on purpose. In other words, it's involuntary. It's as an emotional response. I mean, chimpanzees have been shown that, they give a treat and the rest of the troop is over there behind them and they don't want everybody over there coming their good stuff. And they'll start to squeal with excitement and they'll put their own hand over their own mouth to muffle their own, squeals of delight. So I don't know that it's necessarily they do it on purpose. Not saying that there aren't times that they don't do it intentionally, but
I get what you're saying. Kind of like it's not meant for you. It wasn't meant for you necessarily.
well,
Just kind of an opinion, of course.
yeah, of course. It's like when you give a 3-year-old a birthday present, they squeal. They're happy. It's an emotional response. You see something you like, you go, oh. It's just an emotional response, and that's we're only after studying lots of different instances of vocalizations and what's going on prior to that, can we really make a big determination, because they vocalize when we're not around. I'm certain of that. I mean, we've put out recorders out in the field in Area X that they're running now. They run 24/7, 365 days a year. So, we're trying to, it's a massive amount of information and just trying to, catalog it and quantify it as, right now gathering the information is more important than trying to decipher it. And so we're gathering as much research and data as we possibly can in X, which is, I think, something that a lot of people don't quite understand about our group, the NAWC. It does research and lots of different, photographic evidence, hair, DNA tissue of different kinds, audio recordings, other types of physical evidence, hair, footprints, that sort of thing. We try and collect data on all of it, and not just focus, solely on the specimen collection aspect of it. We're trying to cover all of our bases, and it's a big task, but it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. I'm curious, going back to you and your dad in that camper, what did your dad ever talk about it? I mean, was he ever like, what the hell was that? Or did he give you an opinion as far as what was going on?
Well, at the time, he initially, when it happened, he said that was probably a deer got chased by a mountain lion and ran. He's a Texas boy, and he was just chased by a mountain lion and ran right into the side of the truck. So that was his explanation at the time. And I'm not saying that that's not what it was, but we did not find a deer or a dent anywhere on there. We didn't really look up high for handprints or anything like that. We were looking for tree branches. Later on, he was open to the idea of Bigfoot. As a matter of fact, those two reports that I told you, that my first visual in Idaho and that one with the red eyes, they're both on the BFRO website. If anybody wanted to look them up, the first one, it was in Idaho, Custer County, Idaho, and there's only a few reports there, and the hunter has early morning sighting. And then the other one actually report that the red eyes. My wife Kathy, before we were married, actually took that report from my dad. So that's my dad's report on the BFR website, and that's in I think it says near Herring Creek. It's Tuolumne County, which has got a lot of reports here in Tuolumne County, but hunters have some kind of weird experience there. Cliff has been up in that area. I turned him on to that area, and it's a really great potential. It's right on the edge of the immigrant wilderness. And if my speculation is correct about where Ron Moorhead obtained the Sierra sounds, as a crow flies from that recording site that he had and our red eyes is under 10 miles as a crow flies. It's relatively relatively close.
Yeah,
I don't
pretty
know.
close.
I don't know the exact location he was at, but
Can I ask you about the red eyes? What was it, reflection or were they glowing? And the reason why I ask that is I hear that a lot from a lot of different witnesses. And sometimes I've said, was it must have been reflection. And they'll come back and say, no, these were glowing. Then sometimes you'll ask them, were they glowing? And they'll say, no, it was reflection. I'm just curious, in your own experience, was it reflection from the fire or were they glowing?
well, I at the time, and that's a long. I mean, I've seen other eye shine different times. That was the best and the most prolonged. It was over a half an hour time period, and I tell you, I was a firefighter. After that, I became a firefighter and a paramedic, and I love fire. And you give me a campfire, and you give me like a forest full of dead wood, and baby, we got a fire. And that's what I was doing that night. And we had a decent sized little campfire. My estimation, my impression at the time was that it was reflection off of the campfire. And like I said, at first it was one set, big, way up. It's set really far apart, like bicycle reflectors, which kind of threw me off. I said, "God, Dad, those are huge red eyes." And and I would step over to the edge beyond, the fire pit area, and I'd shine my little weak flashlight out that way. And you could tell that they kind of got smaller, like the head was turning, and then they would disappear. And did that several times. And then I saw the second set off to the side, a little lower, then eventually the third set way off to the side and much lower to the ground. I always got the impression that they were um, reflection. Now, I do know that people have seen, reflections with the naked eye, or illuminations of some sort, without any, perceivable light. But it's kind of, I mean, there's got to be some light somewhere. I've had this discussion with Alton Higgins, the chairman emeritus of the NAWC, several times, and he's adamant that thing is not producing its own light. And then I acquiesce. I mean, I'll compromise and I'll say, okay, until it's proven that they can do that, I guess that's where we got to go. Even though there are, some species of animals on this planet that can do that. We have no evidence that they can do that. But if they're not self-illuminating, then the inside of their eyes are like, if you can imagine the mirrors on the Hubble telescope and reflecting light back, to help aid in their night vision, collecting and concentrating available light. And then that's what we see. I mean, I can see that. Because let me tell you what, these apes, they can see in the dark. I don't know how they do it, but man, they're good at it. It's like a cat. I don't know how they do it, but they do it.
Yeah, not only can they see in the dark, a lot of times you'll hear of eyewitnesses that'll have thermals, for instance. They'll have thermals up, and we assume they can't see the thermal, but they're almost moving around as if you can see them, which is bizarre behavior. It's almost like they don't know that we can't see in the dark. And I say that with, there's a lot of different thermal examples I could throw up, but of where they're tree peeking or where they're doing different things, almost real skittish, and don't realize that we can't see at night.
Yeah, totally. Totally. I agree with you 100% there. I think one of the best examples of what you're talking about is Michael Green and the thing crawling up to grab the candy bar. And it's like Joe Commando Ninja crawling behind that. And there is nobody there. Michael is not there. He set that up to record, and he got out of there. So there were no humans present at that time of that filming. And, the thing was acting like it was, and similar behavior that we've noted in X, that they do hide behind trees and peek around in total darkness, and we see that the only way we see it, maybe catch an eye shine and look at it through a thermal, and you can see them hiding and peeking, and they've done that a lot. We have a lot of reports of that kind of behavior at night, but I think you're right that, but how would they know that we can't do what they can do? I would imagine that they would expect that everything that they can do, we can do.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, Bob. I mean, logically, since they're that type of behavior, makes you wonder if they think that we can see at night like they can see at night, and maybe they assume we can do things that they can do even though we can't. I think that they see us as predators. That's my own personal opinion, but I'm kind of curious. So you have these encounters, you go online to the Bigfoot forums in the late 90s, 2000s, and someone says, "Oh, what you saw is a Bigfoot." Where did you go from there? Did you have more encounters, or I'm kind of curious from that point to where you joined the North American Wood Ape Conservancy Group. What kind of happened between then? What did that time frame look like?
Well, I did have one other very strange encounter before I even encountered the Bigfoot forums. So a couple of them, they were real, insignificant. I mean, nothing verifiable. I find tiny little barefoot, human-looking footprints in a stream bed where I wouldn't figure any humans to be. Certainly not near a road. Hear what sounds like people talking out in the willows right nearby to that, kind of sounds of, trees, limbs snapping and stuff, and behind me when I'm bow hunting. But I had another deer hunting trip to the Trinity Wilderness, Trinity Alps Wilderness area, and we went back on horseback, hired an outfitter to take us 12 miles back into the Trinity Alps, dropped us off for 9 days, and came back and picked us up. And one night, me and this other guy went up, and we had rented a mule to be with us and to pack out something, an animal, if we dropped it in a canyon to haul the game. And he and I put our camp in boxes, in pack boxes, and put it on Nancy. And we went up to the far ridge away from everybody else. And it was just me and him and Nancy up there for the night. And it was a perfect, beautiful spot. We followed the outfitter's recommendation about how to take care of Nancy for the night. She was on like a 30-foot lead and tied to a tree in the middle of a grassy meadow. And that was her thing. And she was just like, barely outside of our her rope, just almost reached our tent. We wanted to keep her close, and as we were going to bed, something let out a scream, and it screamed for almost 10 seconds. And it first started, it was down the hill from it, sounded like a woman being murdered, and then it went into an angry scream and ended in what sounded like a lion's roar that pulsated, and it just scared the holy Moses out of both of us. And we slept with our deer rifles in the tent with us that night, ready for action. And so we went and checked on Nancy, and everything seemed to be fine. And she was, like I say, just right there beside us. But once we got back into the tent, about half hour, 45 minutes later, we'd no sooner been in the tent where Nancy started going nuts. And so we get out, we run over there, and she's got the front leg up in the air, picked up, and her knee is swollen. And her eyes are wide, her ears are back, her nostrils are flaring, and she's looking off into the trees. And we went over there, and we didn't see anything. We didn't hear anything. So poor girl, she obviously got injured somehow. So we untied her and brought her and parked her right outside the entrance to our tent, on a short lead. And she was upset, and she had a swollen knee, and we, took care of it all. We didn't see anything, no deer, anything that entire week. And every time somebody would go to the bathroom, they're going, man, there's somebody up there in those rocks. It's like sliding rocks down on us. And we're like, what is going on? And Bigfoot never came up. It was really weird. So yeah, it was 2002. Then I encountered the Bigfoot forums, and it was sort of I was just clicking links. I was following links. It was just like I was link surfing and come across the Bigfoot forums, and I go, oh, this is weird. Okay, well, I'll start reading this. And within a couple of months, I thought, well, maybe I'd forgotten all about that instance in Idaho, and so I kind of posted that on there, and a couple of people came back and said, God, you got to file a report to the BFRO. And I said, why? I said, that's Bigfoot, man. And then I met, the following year, 2003, I met Kathy at the Willow Creek 2003 International Bigfoot Symposium, and met her there, and actually went out on an expedition with she and with her and a couple of other people, BFRO investigators, and this group that we had met at the symposium. There's 8 or 10 of us, and we went up to Tahoe. We're in the area where the Tahoe Scream, within a mile where the Tahoe Scream was recorded. And we had a lot of activity there. And so no sightings, but lots of broken trees and screaming all night long in response to our call blasting. And so from there, I ended up becoming a part of the BFRO, and as an investigator, then later on as what they called a curator. And the pay was the same, though. It was zero. And
You got a fancy title, though.
Yeah, I did. But what it did do is it enabled me to be able to contact a lot of witnesses and get a lot of reports and become really familiar with what other people were seeing. And so I was able to publish some of the reports, of course, that people would file with the BFRO, and a lot of really strange behaviors, but things that were similar to what I had experienced. And so it was really good for me. And, some of the people that I called were surprised to hear from me. It was because their son or their spouse had filed the report, and the old man didn't want to have anything to do with it. And finally, several of the people I talked to go, look, all right, I'll talk to you once. But after this, do not ever call me again. And if you believe me, fine. If you don't, I don't care. And he would tell me the story, and it's just like mind blowing. And they go, that's it. I know it's crazy, but it happened. And if you don't believe me, I don't care. I say, thank you, sir. and so, it kind of went on from there. Kathy and I left the BFRO, and after going on a few expeditions, met some, of course, really great people, Bob Gimlin included. In 2004, went on a couple of BFRO expeditions with him into Northern California and up into the Olympics, and made a lot of, really good friends. And it wasn't until then, Kathy and I were always doing our own thing up here. And Kathy and I got married in 2005. And we were doing a lot of investigation right up here in Tuolumne County, and had a lot of really compelling evidence that we were collecting, and didn't have any visuals. And of course, we were friends. Kathy was a speaker in quite a few conferences back then, and she was invited to talk to several conferences in Texas that was sponsored by at that time called the TBRC. And so we went back there and, met, of course, I'd known Alton Higgins in the BFRO, and quite a few of those guys were in the BFRO, Darrell Collier, way back in the day. So we were familiar with them and became good friends with them. And in 2012, when they really started having a lot of activity, well, I guess end of 11, 12, right in there, they asked us to come and visit this area X, and just sort of give them our unbiased assessment of it. And that was our first week. And we weren't even official members of the group at that time, that we spent that week. I believe it was Operation Persistence Bravo team that was just a mind-blowing week. Absolutely incredible. I went in there with like, oh yeah, this is no problem. I came out of there, I was like, man, I need a drink and a cigarette.
Yeah, I heard.
Holy moly. Man, you don't know what I saw, man.
Yeah.
It was crazy. It was crazy. So, I tell people, a lot of people ask me, why do you believe in Bigfoot? You see, I sometimes I feel like I have people at a disadvantage because I didn't come into this looking to have something proved to me. I came into this going, man, there's something out there and it's scary big. What the hell is it? And the Bigfoot came along and said, it fits everything. It's like, does Bigfoot exist? Yes. Why do you believe? I don't know, because it's big and I saw it and it scared the crap out of me. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Let me ask you, when you were taking these reports with the BFRO, let me back up. When I very first got into this, I would refuse to hear anything strange, anything weird. And my mindset at the time was it must be some great ape that we're chasing. And I know that's the theory that you have. I know it's a theory that most hold down with the North American Wood Ape Conservancy Group. And I get that. I completely get that. And you guys could be right. You guys could be 100% right. I always ask people, what do you think Sasquatch is on the show? And the reason why I ask that is there's no wrong answer, because no one really knows until we have a body. And I'm really hopeful that you guys collect a body down there. But, as I've been taking reports over the years, I've become more open to hear what people are saying. And I'll give you an example. When you were taking these reports, did you ever have someone say, oh, and by the way, there's these weird balls of light on my property I'm also seeing, or I saw Sasquatch vanish? Now, I know when we have a bunch of cult leaders in the Bigfoot community and they're like, oh, I'm the chosen one, and, Sasquatch chose me and all this other nonsense. So I tend to dismiss that. But when it comes from an eyewitness and they're telling you something private and they're very serious about it, it makes me kind of stop and think what's going on here. And I'm curious, as you were taking these different reports with the BFRO, did you ever have anything like that where someone said, oh, and by the way, there's these weird balls of light on my property, or I saw Sasquatch vanish, or I saw something out of the norm, kind of more, I guess, paranormal, as you were taking these different reports, investigating these reports?
I think I may have had one such report, although I did hear about a lot of them. We were instructed in the BFRO to go ahead and take all the reports, except for the clearly trolls, like, Bigfoot ate my grandmother. To take all of this, but not necessarily to divulge every single detail. And in the overall, in the BFRO reports, there were, a few reports of glowing orbs or strange lights. And I may have talked to one person that said that there was, oh yeah, I did. It was coming from over the back of the hill. And, I had to go through looking at phases of the moon, time of day, blah, 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 blah. And, it was a full moon that night. And that's basically where it rose. So it's like you can't count out. You didn't see a globe. You just saw a light. And it was probably rising full moon beyond the mountainside. But I have heard people tell me that they have seen lights, that they have woken up and they felt like they were illuminated. And I've heard people say that they have seen green lights off in the distance. And not people that are members of the NAWC, but
Right.
other people that I have talked to in person, and yeah, I mean, I guess they were in conjunction with Bigfoot reports, but I mean, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, I don't know. I do know that we were in Skookum Meadows with a group of friends, and we were there for a few days, and there was a couple of guys had done a night walk through the meadow down this road and came back reporting these little glowing lights. And so Cliff Barrettman was there, and Cliff, God bless him. I mean, he'd like, he'd leave lunch sitting on the table to go investigate something, and he jumped up and goes, "Let's go." So we all went down there. And no fooling, that guy was right. There was little lights illuminating from an unexplainable source until I found one on a little bush about 3 feet high. And I got down there on my hands and knees and waited for it to do it again. And it was a firefly. And but it was red. And most of them that I've seen in Texas, were like white. And so Kat had to check it out with what do you call it, bug person, entomologist or whatever from that national forest, and said, "Oh yeah, no, it's a rare species of firefly that they have there, and that's how they attract their mates." So it's really hard to say what these lights are, but fireflies don't all have the same color, and they don't all have the little same duration of illumination. So you got to kind of, I mean, when you're observing these things, you write it all down. I think one of the problems overall that people make in this reporting is that they'll make conclusions. And it's like, rather than report observations, they go, "Well, Bigfoot was talking to me because he like flashed, I saw a light." It's like, okay, well, let's step back. Tell me what you saw. I saw a light. Okay, what did you hear? Well, I heard nothing. Okay, so how does Bigfoot was talking to you because you saw a light? Where does that come from? That comes from their interpretation of that and them drawing a conclusion. And I see a lot of witnesses trying to do that. That's kind of what I think the human mind tries to do, is to put something in a box that the mind feels comfortable with. And it's, what is that? Oh, that's why when I saw this big ape across the mountainside from me in Idaho, stood up on two legs, immediately I go, "That's a dude." That's a dude.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and it felt comfortable to me.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Bob. I mean, sometimes things can be explained away, and you can explain different things that people tell you. I think a lot of times you can explain different things, and that wasn't really the type of light I was talking about. Kind of the more of the balls of light, what people call orbs, or I guess in World War II they called them Foo Fighters. The pilots were seeing them, and people seem to be seeing them in the forest. And I've seen them, and I have no explanation for what I saw. I'm not saying it's Bigfoot related. Didn't even have a Bigfoot encounter when I saw the lights. I just saw this weird ball of light floating in the forest. And, I'll respectfully disagree. I think most of the eyewitnesses I've talked to, when they talk about their encounter on their property, they'll also mention these weird balls of light, but it's more like a footnote, more like, "Oh, and by the way, I'm also seeing this, and I don't know what this is." But I completely get where you're coming from. Let me ask you. So you and Kathy go to Area X in Oklahoma, and I know Kathy talked a little bit about a sighting she had. Did you ever see Sasquatch, or did you ever have an encounter when you were there in Area X beyond rock throwing and vocals?
Well, that first week, yeah, we had of course, the sighting of the two that were clearly apes. And I call them apes because everything that I've seen, their behavior, indicates to me that they're an ape. Like say, Kathy told the story. We had been, sitting there. Well, actually, it had happened over the period, unfolded over about an hour in the late afternoon. And that this place we were at the time had multiple cabins, and there's no electricity or anything like that down there. These are primitive cabins. and with metal roofs, and they're kind of spread out. And we would hear rock hit or banging on one cabin, and we'd go over there, and then we'd hear a rock banging on the other cabin on the far side. Let's say we're situated in the middle, and it's one side to the other end, back and forth. And we did that several times. And we had glimpses of movement up in the trees. It was right at the base of a very steep hillside, and not a cliff, but, a hillside, and densely brushed in. And we'd catch glimpses of stuff like that up there. So going back and forth, and Kathy staying there in the middle watching all of this and listening and looking out for stuff during that time. And I don't think she really mentioned this to you. And this is really weird. And I mean, I've talked about this before, and this is the truth. This is just the way that it unfolded. We heard a bang. We all went down there. We had done this for, like say, an hour or so, and there was another bang. The guys, there was 5 of us there, and the 3 guys went down to the far one to go check it out again. And Kathy said, hang here for a second. I saw right over there in that group of trees and bushes, I saw a limb just snap back up like it was pulled down. Go over there and look in there. So I went over there, and there was a fallen tree that was sticking out into the trail. You had to walk around this old dead log, and it crossed like a tiny little shallow ravine, a little drainage ravine. I don't know what it was. It was just a depression in the ground there in the middle of all this brush. And I'm right up next to the log, and I'm looking. So I can see the hillside on the other side, and I'm looking, scanning. I go, man, I don't see anything. I thought, well, maybe I'll walk over there. And I was going to hop up on this log, like Daniel Boone style, and, use this as a bridge to get to the other side. And I thought, man, I don't know. I don't want to fall off this log and down and do this, hurt myself or, get bit by a snake or something. And I can see it right there. So I contemplated it. When I did, I kind of glanced down. I'm still looking up, but I glanced down real quick, and it looks like a couple of other, stumps or logs laying down there in that, dark logs down there in that little ravine. And this was like the sun was starting to set, and it was in the shadows, and it was kind of dark in there. So I didn't put my flashlight on it. I thought, well, I can put my foot here, then step on that log, and forget it. So I came back and said, there's nothing over here. I didn't see anything. And I came back and I'm real puzzled about it. So the whole event. So finally it quieted down, and we went and sat down to take a little bit of a breather. And we're sitting there, and Kathy is looking back at the same area where this brush was. And then she hops up and just takes off running in that direction. I go, where are you going? She goes, there's 2 of them. They're right there. And she's running at a flat run at them. And I look up in time, and I see 2 upright, dark colored figures, ape looking, the same color head to toe. And one was out front and one was behind, and they're walking like they were going to come around behind us on the shed that was off to the side of the property to get closer or something. I guess, I don't know. And when she comes running, the one in front stops. It turns around and takes a step and bams, crashes right into the one behind it. It's kind of like the 3 Stooges. They bounce off each other. They step back, and then they turn, and the one out front turned and ran up the hill just like a flash. I mean, it was a blur up this at least 45-degree incline, maybe steeper. It was rough, covered with greenbrier, and boom, it was gone. And just a split second after that one, the other one, which was a little smaller in size, went up and grabbed onto a fallen tree that was probably, went up there and looked at it, was probably 6 or 8 inches diameter. And it hopped up on that thing and used its, went down on all 4s and used its hands to help pull itself up, like it was like running up a ladder really fast. And the thing, they were amazingly, incredibly fast. So that was the first night we obviously saw them, and then that night was, there was a lot of activity. They were throwing rocks on the roof. They slapped the cabin that night, and the next morning we're fried. We had four of us out of the five had the sighting. The fifth guy didn't see it. He didn't get turned around in time, but the guy didn't see it. He goes, Bob, well, come over here, tell me what you were doing over here in these bushes. And I said, yeah, then I'm looking and I don't see anything. And I look down there and I'm thinking about stepping on those logs down in the crevice. And I look down there, and those logs that I had thought about putting my foot on, they weren't there. And I went back, how many logs did I tell you there were? They said, well, you said there were 2 or 3 down the little ditch. And they look down there, they're gone. All I can figure is that those apes were behind that fallen tree and ducked down and let me walk right up on them and almost step on them. And they were that disciplined in hiding and staying still and quiet. That's all that I can figure. And then later on that week, I saw another one, and it was definitely a different one. It was, I call it the color of an Irish setter. I saw it walking across the hillside from the waist up, and then the sun glistened off its hair like an Irish setter. It had a shine to it, and that was brief, but it was huge. So those are the biggest main sightings that I've had in Area X.
Yeah, that's an amazing encounter, Bob. There's definitely stuff going on down there in Area X, and it's kind of cool to hear your side of that encounter. I know I heard Kathy's side of the encounter in episode 655, but there's a lot more details from what you saw, and I don't want you to feel like you have to defend your theory on it being an ape. I get completely where you're coming from. I mean, it looks like an ape. A lot of its behaviors are ape-like. I think for me, after being in this for so long, I guess more of a short period of time, something doesn't quite add up for this just to be a North American primate we haven't been able to catch up with. And that's my opinion, and we can disagree on that. And that's supposed to be the fun part of this subject. Most people make not fun, is disagreeing and listening to other people. Regarding the North American Wood Ape Conservancy group that you're a part of, and I actually respect the group, mainly because of the group of people that are involved with it. And it's one of the few groups I would say is actually doing research. I've asked researchers in the past, tell me about your research, and you generally don't get anything. But you guys are actually doing real research down there. And I'm kind of curious about this Tag 7 experiment that you guys did. Tell us about Tag 7.
Well, sure. First of all, we wrote up a paper. We have a really nice website at woodape.org, and we published a paper, or several papers on there, including the Ouachita Project monograph, which chronicles 4 years of field study. But this was after that was published. Came up with the idea, and we have a lot of extremely intelligent individuals in the group, and people that we don't really publicize who all of our members are. And it's not necessarily because they want to remain anonymous. It's just not what we're into. But we have a wildlife biologist out of Maine. He's currently employed as a wildlife biologist, and John Perry. And he had done some work in the field with tracking movements of wildlife. The research that they were doing, I guess at the time, was with turtles. And they had taken these, which turtles are easy to catch, by the way, compared to wood ape. I think they're a lot easier. And they would take these little radio transmitter tags. We call them a tag. It's a little radio transmitter, battery powered. And they would glue them to a turtle shell. And then they could track the movements of the turtle, and if they migrate or where they go to on Saturday night, I don't know. Well, whatever turtles do, they would figure it out. But they're tiny, tiny little tags. and they're actually in the paper that we have published on the website, the Tag 7 paper. You can see we put how people can obtain all of this equipment, the model numbers that we use. Links are provided to the companies that we get this from, and it's from Advanced Telemetry Systems out of Minnesota. And these tags, like I say, they're radio transmitter tags, and they come in all sizes. And the smaller they are, the smaller the battery, the less they weigh, and the shorter the duration of the battery life, unfortunately. So we had been trying to, discover. Of course, everybody here say, well, let's put a GPS transmitter in like in a tennis ball, and they'll grab that. And personally, in my opinion, I don't think Bigfoot's going to carry around a tennis ball for 6 months. I just don't think it's going to happen.
No, probably.
And yeah, so these things are not, they're not GPS. They are just a radio transmitter that emits a radio signal. It's inaudible to the ear. You have to have a receiver to pick it up. And so through collaborative efforts of John's inspiration and the great minds of a lot of very skilled woodsmen and biologists that we already had in the group, Mark McClurkin, one of our, at the time was a member on the board of directors, and I come up with the idea John was wondering how we could deploy one of these radio transmitters to a wood ape, and Mark came up with the inspiration to put one inside of a big burr. Now, down in Texas area, things grow bigger, and there's a member of the sunflower family that's got a burr. It's a seed pod is what it is, and it gets, if anybody who has a horse anywhere, in the brush in Texas can tell you what these are. They're cuckleburrs. They call them cuckleburrs, and they're can be up to an inch long. And they've got these spiny little spines sticking out all the way around, and they get hopelessly entangled in like horses' tails and manes and dog fur. And you almost have to cut it out. I mean, they're just so hopelessly tangled in the fur. They thought, well, what if we use one of these to adhere itself to an ape? So through trial and error, he discovered, he's perfected the method of hollowing out and then sterilizing these seed pods. So we don't want to transfer, noxious weeds. So we would make it, incapable of spreading its spawn, and then put one of these little radio transmitter tags, super glue it to the inside of this cuckleburr, and then hang it from a string, and hopefully as something walks through there, it would stick it to itself. And Mark had seen a wood ape with a big mangy lock of hair, like a dreadlock mats, and up around the shoulder head area, and he thought, it's likely that one of these birds could get caught in that. And so through a lot of trial and error, through all different types of fur that Mark had, access to, he perfected that, gluing this little radio transmitter. It has like a little 3 to 4 inch little wire antenna hanging off of it inside a cuckleburr. And then how the radio transmitter activates is got a little magnet on the back of it, tiny little magnet. And so you could store them so they don't, you don't run the battery down. And only by removing the magnet does it activate the radio transmitter. So I super glued a little hook onto the magnet and onto the cuckleburr and the tag, and we put it on some string traps that Alton Higgins had identified some areas of travel around our site there in X. And when I say a string trap, you just take a sewing thread and you put it up about 7 feet high and you skewer it to one tree, and then you take it and you wrap it loosely around a limb or a tree several feet away. And so the idea, as Matt said, told you you walk, whatever it is walks through there, and it doesn't necessarily break the thread, but the idea is that it will unravel it from the loose side and drag it one direction, so where it's been compromised and their direction of travel. And Alton had identified several spots, what we call string traps, and identified potential areas to deploy these things. And so they use the same type of method as the string trap to make the little cockleburr, which is ingenious, the cockleburr, even more sticky. They use rat trap glue, like Tomcat rat trap, those little flat rat sticky traps. And you scrape out some of that and you smear it on the cockleburr, and that sticks to everything. And it doesn't, I don't care if it's raining, pouring, 110 degrees, that stuff is sticky. And the hope to aid in its adhesion to the fur and give it time to get entangled. And they deployed 7 of those. And so the idea is that you hang these at an 8-foot height, and the magnet is on a stationary string, so that when something breaches this thread, drags the cockleburr, the magnet is pulled off by another thread, stronger thread, and activates the tag, and then the animal leaves with the tag intact. Well, we had it set up for 2 months before the first tag was activated, and it was activated, and we deployed them in July of 2015, and it was activated near the end of August. So it was up over a month, and then we followed the tag, which was extremely difficult to do because they don't stay still. And these tags, only over clear terrain, best you can get is 5 to 8 kilometers, and Area X is anything but clear terrain. So the range was much less shorter, and the only way that you can find the tag, it shows up as a beep. You have a little monitor, a little radio receiver, and it's like it just beeps and it pulses on this little grid as to the strength. And you have to walk along with this linear antenna. You hold in your hand and you sweep it back and forth, and you kind of triangulate. And so that was the method that we used to try to track and find the thing. And it worked successfully for 10 months until the battery went dead. So, we have gathered a lot of data on movements, and we have had 25 hits over that 10-month period. And it was interesting how initially when it happened, they found it near dark, and the thing had a powerful signal, was close by, and they figured, well, it'll still be around in the morning. And they go out there the next morning, and it's gone. They couldn't find it. We had no idea what happened. We drove around. We had sent teams up there for months, scouring the hills, the whole area, did not find it. The only way we found it was in December. We were at our wits' end. And so we had a couple of private pilots in the group, and they put an omnidirectional antenna, mounted it to the bottom of a private airplane, and they flew up there, and they did low passes through the entire area and got absolutely nothing. And then they didn't want to give up, so they started doing concentric circles, started from the and just started spiraling outward more and more, and they finally got a hit, and it was several miles away. And then from there, we were able to track it. 25 more hits and locations throughout the rest of that time that the battery was active. And from that, we were able to sort of, using different programs that wildlife research groups use to study and estimate home range for different types of animals, we were able to come up with an idea of not only where it was during different parts of the year, because they were conglomerated in one area in the summer, in the spring in an area, and in the winter they were in a completely different area, nowhere near where we were. And using those methods, we were able to come up with an effective home range for tag 7, whatever it was tagged to. We think it was a wood ape at 110 square kilometers, or 42 square miles. And so, we compared that to bear. There had been bear studies in the same area. They're using different methods. They were not, nowhere near, like maybe at the most 8 square miles, and we got 42 square miles for our home range.
Yeah, it's kind of outside of the box thinking. I like that kind of genius idea, actually. Let me ask you, what makes you think it was actually attached to a Sasquatch? And then my other question regarding this experiment: did you guys learn anything as far as where it was going, what it was doing? Was there any rhyme or reason behind the pattern of its movement?
Well, the first question, what makes us think that it was actually a Sasquatch or ape that it attached to? And in the paper, we address all that, all the likely other creatures that are indigenous to the forest, and even some that aren't, like cows and horses. And we give our rationale there in the paper kind of a little bit more in depth than I can do here. But first of all, the thing that kind of sets it off is height at which it was hung, and it was hung at a 7-foot height. So unless something could stand up and reach that height, which a bear probably could, then it's unlikely it was anything else. We tried to stick it to feathers to see if it would stick to feathers, and it really doesn't, and they fell off quite quickly. And other types of hair, deer and cougar hair, it just is too short and just doesn't really adhere. But so that's the first thing, and that it was nowhere near a tree. It was hanging out in the middle, like 3 or 4, maybe 6 feet away from any tree. So it's just kind of suspended out in space there, where these tags were, these cuckleburrs. And so, that's part of it. And then again, what I mentioned about the home range of the bear, and that's why we went into such great lengths on determining not only, of course, comparing them to bear for the home range is an interesting way of comparing it, and how other species are determined their home range, but also then why it isn't. We don't think that it's a very unlikely candidate that it is a bear with that size of home range. In the same area, it's 5 times as large. So those are a couple of the main factors, and some of the others are again. And I was present on this one time that we did track. We were able to get a radio signal hit, and it was clear. We were up on a ridge, and it was clear that the tag was below us and getting further away, because this is like a linear antenna that you have to aim at it like a metal detector. And so aiming it downward, we were getting a strong signal. And then it started moving up, and it's moving up the other mountainside across from us, and it's getting weaker. And then you could tell we were aiming straight at the ridge of the mountainside across from us, and then it got really weak, and then it disappeared, assuming that it went down from us up the other side of the mountain, and then cleared that crest and down the other side in a matter of just a few minutes. And that terrain is nothing. It's nothing that you can make any good time on at all. A human would be, really unlikely. And any other animals, I don't know. I personally haven't seen deer booking it like from one side of the mountain to 2 mountains over, just as a straight line. It was like, here we go, we're on a road trip. They just don't behave that way. So there, we don't know, of course, for sure, because we did not get a visual while we had a radio hit. And believe me, we tried. And we sent teams out and tried a pincher movement with two teams on with the plane overhead and two ground teams, both with radio antennas and receivers. And they tried chasing that thing, and it left them in the dust. And it cleared a ridge, and it was gone in a matter. I mean, you don't know whether it was playing with them. It just stayed away from them. Whatever it wasn't going to get close. So, there's I guess, I don't know if any other animal can do that sort of thing, then I guess that that
Doesn't
maybe
really
you might
make
want to.
sense. Yeah.
It just didn't to us. And as far as what we learned, where they were, what times of the year, we started looking into that, and we could all of these clumpings over here within a 2-month period, and over here in a 2-month period, and up here in a 2-month period. And we started looking at, what resources are there. And we, began to identify, things that, food resources that might be available in one type of a little minor ecosystem, if you will, because like there's lots of berry patches over here, and down here there's lots of nuts. And it's a mixed conifer hardwood forest. That Area X is located in, and there are not a lot of conifers or pine trees in the area that we're in X, because it is heavily inundated with nut-bearing hardwoods, hickory nuts and walnuts, and really nut-rich area. And so if you kind of look at what the times of year that the nuts start to drop, that's the time of year that we found all those clumpings in the nut producing areas. And in the winter, but at the same time, they drop their leaves in the winter, and it's barren. It's open. It's wide open. It's a pleasure being there in the wintertime, actually, because you can see, you're looking through sticks of, thousands of tree trunks, but there's no greenery to speak of. And yet and that's in the wintertime. In the wintertime, where we saw the clumpings is a conifer forest, and which stays green all year long. And so, of course, there's food resources over there as well. And, I mean, the Native Americans used to do that. They'd say, well, they're migrating. I don't know if you would talk about, walking in a big circle following the resources. I'm not sure you can call that a migration. I just think that you're just like, you're browsing in a big giant circle. So we were able to make some assumptions from that. Can't really say conclusions, definitive, but it's highly likely that they're in the wintertime, that they're choosing areas that has water and a thick, evergreen forest. But they don't produce the nuts, and they don't have the berries. And so we think they're just following the food resources. And if that's the case, then we can kind of predict what area they're going to be in at any time of the year. And that was part of our, hope for this type of research. And that, it turned out real well. And we keep trying. And these things only have a shelf life, even though if you don't use them, they're not good for more than a year or so. If you want to save them and they don't get deployed, you want to use them the next year, they run out pretty quickly. They're tiny, their batteries are like the size of it's got to be like a hearing aid battery. So they can't hold their juice that long, and they're expensive. They're close to like $200 a piece, and we get 7 or 9 of them every year. We're totally volunteer, totally self-funded, 501c3. People donate their time, energy, resources, and anything that goes into that research and getting us there at all, we provide it. So when we're not looking for, somebody to, sponsor this, we don't answer to anybody. And we also are expecting, we don't even want to make any money off of this at all. And this is part of the reason that we do this research, and not only to help prove the existence of the species, but also to conserve its habitat, and also educational purposes, which is the focus of the Ouachita Project monograph. That is to educate the public, and things like this Tag 7. We basically give you a blueprint, or other researchers out there, of how to do this. So if somebody wants to try this, here's all the instructions right here. And if anybody wants some further tips, I'm happy to correspond with them. Because our ultimate goal is conservation of the species and its habitat, which is really important. And if I could take I know I'm just
No, you're fine, Bob.
running here. It's really important to people say, well, why don't you just leave them alone? Oh, they're doing just fine. Well, you can go on a U.S. government website it's called Loss of Open Space. And the estimates from the U.S. government is that the United States is losing 5,000 to 6,000 acres of open space per day in the United States.
Oh, wow.
And people say, well, that's not much. There's hundreds of millions of open space. Yeah, well, the problem is 5,000 or 6,000 acres a day adds up pretty fast. And not only that, think about if, let's say, 5,000 or 6,000 acres in a day, a big deal. What if that 5,000 acres was 10 acres high and 500 acres wide? That's a huge piece of land. And you put shopping malls in there, or a city, or interstate highway, or whatever it is. Now you have segmented what potentially, in theory, is a habitat into two habitats, making it difficult for wildlife to cross in between. So not only loss of the space, but also fragmentation of available habitat, is happening as well. And not only that, of course, in southeast Oklahoma, forest products are a big commodity. People still like to use paper for whatever reason. I'm not here to judge, but if you want to use paper, there are companies that will provide you with wood product. It is an agricultural product to them. And on private forests, thousands upon thousands of acres of hardwood forests have been decimated, and the ecosystem has changed from a hardwood forest to a plantation of pine trees. Now, this changes everything as far as the wildlife is concerned. They maybe can use it for protection, shelter in the wintertime, but they're not getting a lot of food resources out of there. Smaller chipmunks might, but the bigger animals aren't getting so much out of it. And so it's that type of eco system changing that is really threatening a lot of it. That's not loss of open space. It wouldn't be considered loss of open space because it's still trees, but it's transformation of habitat. And so if that trend continues, then who knows what? I'm here to tell you, as far as I'm convinced, that there is a population of whatever you want to call it. We call it the wood ape because it is more ape than it is human from behavior that I've seen. So, and that's how local people go, you just make you feel better to call it ape. No, that's what the locals called it. They have you go to different places around the country. And, a lot of places have their own little, names for it. And that's what they happen to call it around there. And it fits. And, mountain devils, mountain monkeys, mountain apes. I mean, there's a million of them.
Yeah.
But
No, I tend to agree with you, Bob. I mean, I'm with you on what you're saying. And I think a lot of times when people hear your guys' goal with the North American Wood Ape Conservancy Group of wanting to kill one or collect a specimen, they stop listening at that point. And I think that's a big mistake because, our environment is changing. We are losing forests. We are losing land. I didn't realize we were losing as much as you were saying with regard to the website, but it doesn't shock me one bit. And, I've heard your wife say, if you're against killing one, you've doomed the species. And I tend to agree with her on that. Assuming it is an ape, let's go with that theory. Let me ask you, have you ever thought about contacting a primate specialist like a Dr. Anna Nakaris from the UK who's actually found a primate? I realize what she found was on a smaller level, but maybe asked an expert to come in and say, what do you do to bring an ape in? How did you find the primate that you found? Have you considered that at all as far as bringing an expert? You may have.
Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, to answer your question, we have. We had a few years ago, we had Ian Redmond come and be a speaker at one of our conferences, and he wasn't able to make it up into Area X, and he has an invitation to go in there. And I've had discussions at Beachfoot, as a matter of fact, with Dr. Esteban Sarmiento about that, and he's given me a lot of tips, and I believe he's been invited there as well. Now, John Mayenzinski has actually been there, and he did extensive field notes on resources of food resources and plants, and he spent a week in there by himself. So we've had naturalists in there. David I'm going to butcher his last name, so I'm not going to say it. Mijakowski, a naturalist in there, and he had quite the unique experience. In there with Brian Brown, and they heard a wood cracking, and they ran behind the cabin and looked up the hill, and there was a giant tree that was kind of leaning out, and it was bouncing up and down, and it was shaking. It was like bam, 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 and then finally it cracked, and something big came out of the top of that tree and dropped to the ground and ran off. And that tree was, they went up and measured it a few days later, and it was a black walnut tree, and it was 18 inches in diameter at breast height. It was a healthy tree that was not rotten on the inside. And so what we think happened was there was a giant ape up in near the top of the tree, way up in the branches anyway, and all we figure is jumping up and down on it and making the thing, give it some torque, and the thing snapped. And, I mean, we get a lot of skeptics that love to make fun of us, but, you know what? I don't care.
I don't really see why, though. I mean, I've always been kind of impressed with that group down there. I always thought you guys did cool work, and you guys documented everything. Everything's on woodape.org, and everyone's been open. And if you look at the collective group down there, there's a lot of professionals down there, that. And I wasn't breaking your balls about the primate question. I was just kind of curious if you guys, I'm sure you've already thought of it, but if you guys have thought about going that route. I think what you guys are doing down there is great. I really hope that you guys do prove it. I told Kathy that, it'd be the best day of my life if you guys proved it, because I could go do something else. But I really wish you guys luck down there, Bob. And
thanks.
I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your encounter and share what happened to you. I've always been curious how you kind of got into where you're at now and how you started. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on, man.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure talking with you, Les. And, feel free to contact me anytime.
Thanks again, Bob. And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Until next time, everyone.
Sky